One thing we learned this semester was the place value system and how it's based on powers of 10, and how for every place value to the left is 10 times bigger than the previous place value. Every place value to the right is 10 times smaller than the previous place value. So when we multiplied a number by 10, it would make it 10 times bigger, or move that digit one space to the left. Another thing that we learned was that the decimal point will always be after the ones place. So if you identify the decimal point, then you know that the ones place will always be right before that. So I'm going to put the number 50 in my power of 10 slider here, and I know it's going to go right here because the decimal point will be right after the ones place. And then to multiply that number times 10, I'm going to make it 10 times bigger. So I'm going to slide it to the right one place value, or one space, because 10 has 1 0. I'm going to fill in that with a 0, and 5 times 10 we know is 500. Okay, if I reset that back to 50, okay, and now I'm going to multiply 50 times 100. 100 has 2 zeros, so that would be like 10 times 10, or 100. So I'm going to slide this 2 places to the right. There's 1, there's 2. I'm going to fill in my zeros, and there's my 5,000. 50 times 100 is 5,000, and we can see 1, 2, 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3 zeros in our answer. Well, if multiplying moves it left, then dividing is going to move it to the right. So I'm going to reset my 50 right here, right at my decimal point, and to divide by 10, it's going to be 1/10, or 10 times smaller. So to divide by 10, it's actually going to slide one place to the right. So instead of being a 50, it's now only worth a 5. 50 divided by 10 is 5. Likewise, if I wanted to divide by 100, 100 is made up of a 10 times 10, so that's 2 spaces. So to divide by 100, I'm going to move it 1, 2 spaces to the right. And now that's actually going to give me a decimal number, because now the 5 is after the decimal, and that is in the 10th spot. So that answer is 5/10. Now, here we go. These are the numbers I'm looking for. Okay, now let's try that with 235. Again, the decimal is going to be right after the ones place. So the 5 is in the ones place, the 3 is a 30, and the 2 is a 200. To multiply by 10, it needs to be 10 times bigger. Okay, so that 200 is now going to become a 2,000. That 30 is now going to be a 300, and that 5 is now going to be a 50. So we have 2,350. All right, if I start with that same original number, 235, and I want to divide by 10, then it's going to shift the opposite direction, and it's actually going to get 10 times smaller, or be 1/10 of what it was before. So now that 200 is only a 20, and that 30 is only a 3, and that 5 is only a 5/10, because that is in the 10th spot. So the answer is 23.5. When you understand this system, then decimals shouldn't be an issue, because decimals are just an extension of the place value system. Okay, and if we reset that back to 235 and divide by 100, again, 100 is basically divided by 10 divided by 10. So we're going to shift it twice. There's 1 and there's 2. So that 200 went all the way down to a 2 because it shifted 2 places to the right, or became 100 times smaller. So now that gives us a 2.35, or a 2 and 35 hundredths. So we ended up in the hundredths spot when we were finished. Okay, now we can extend this to decimal numbers. Okay, if you understand how this slider works, then it shouldn't be an issue when you have to multiply or divide decimal numbers by powers of 10, because you're just shifting the number, either moving it place values bigger or place values smaller. Let me get my thing reset here. All right, so we've got 35 and 8/10. Again, 35 and 8/10. To multiply it by 10, you need to make it 10 times bigger. So I'm going to shift it one place to the left. That 30 is going to turn into a 300, and our answer will be 358. Okay, if I reset it, 35 and 8/10, and I want to divide by 10, I'm going to have to go the opposite direction. That 30 is only going to be 1/10 as big. It's now only going to be a 3. Okay, notice the digits are not changing, they are just sliding. So that is 3 and 58 hundredths. Okay, if we reset this, 35 and 8/10, and I want to multiply by 100, it needs to be 100 times bigger. So instead of being a 30, it's going to be a 3,000. So I'm going to shift it 2 spaces to the left. Okay, and that becomes 3,580. 3,580. Okay, if I reset that, 35 and 8/10 divided by 100, again, is 100 times smaller, so it's going to shrink. That's 1/10. 2 spaces would be 1/100th, so I'm going to shift everything 2 spaces, and now everything's after the decimal, so I have 0.358 or 358 thousandths, because I go all the way to the thousandths spot. Hopefully your child will also see a similarity between this and the metric system, because it's based the same way, powers of 10. Oops, sorry, I skipped one. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. 100,000. That should look a lot like the metric place value chart in their measurement section.